How do I find a new job? How can I make a career change? And the biggest question of all, can I really find a career that I love? Hey, my name is Jen Smith, and I believe career success doesn't have to be at the expense of living a radiantly happy and healthy lifestyle. As a former HR leader and recruiter turned career coach, I get what companies are looking for when hiring top talent. What that means for you is an unmatched combination of insider knowledge and the best kept secrets about making heart-based career changes and navigating the ups and downs of job searching in today's world of work. Whether you're a recent graduate navigating the job market for the first time or a seasoned professional ready for a career change, this show is for you. So grab your coffee or your kombucha, pull up a seat, and get ready to be challenged and inspired to move beyond your self-doubt and take the right next steps towards landing a career you love. Because you deserve a long, radiantly happy and healthy career. This is the Flourish Careers Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Flourish Careers Podcast. I'm Jen Smith, your host, and I'm thrilled to be here for another installment of Flourishing Together, a monthly segment dedicated to curated conversations with industry insiders sharing wisdom and strategies for improving your work and well-being. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to Jen Pestikas. Jen is an executive with over 20 years of experience in the financial services industry. She's currently the Senior Vice President of Business Development of a Chicagoland institution. Jen understands the necessary skills to make significant leaps in your career, including mindset, asking for what you want, interviewing skills, the ability to negotiate, and more. In addition to her corporate work, Jen leverages her experience with her personal company, Brave Women at Work, where she offers career and leadership coaching for women. She helps her clients better identify their strengths, what they want, what is holding them back, and how to remove the barriers so they can take bolder and braver action in their careers. And I can wholeheartedly attest that Brave Women at Work is a vibrant and empowering community of women who have overcome challenges and have created happier and healthier careers and lives. Fun fact, Jen and I first connected after I tuned into her Brave Women at Work podcast. I was so inspired by her interview with Heather Eck that I immediately booked a spirit portrait session with Heather. That session sparked a wonderful introduction to Jen. We instantly bonded and geeked out over our shared love of our spirit portraits. And fast forward today, here we are on the podcast together, collaborating even further on some other projects. So Jen, welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here, fellow Jen. Thank you for having me.
Jen squared. Yep, that's what we are today.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Jen, let's get into it. I've read your book, your story in Brave Women at Work, Lessons in Confidence, and you share a very powerful story about being thrown into a challenging situation. And I'm going to add, this is one of the most challenging situations I have ever heard of at work. And wow. I've heard of a lot because I've been in HR my whole career. And this situation was so challenging, obviously tested your confidence. So would you be willing to walk our listeners through that situation?
Yes. So I had an amazing mentor. His name is RJ. And he was the person that believed in me, even though I didn't believe in myself. And so in HR forums, there's something called talent management review. And when my name would come up, people would say, oh, is she leadership material? And he's like, she could be the CEO of this place. So he always stood by me. And for that, I'm forever grateful. So what happened with RJ is that I call him kind of like another Rolling Stone. So he loved Rolling Stones, and he was a work hard, play hard, sales manager type lifestyle. And we, no joke, we had many a meeting at a bar, and I always told him, I was like, you know what, you're pushing too hard, you're partying too hard. And so I told him on a plane, actually, because I don't remember if I wrote this in the book, but I was on a plane with him after a conference and told him, I'm like, I don't want to speak at your funeral, slow down. And on Valentine's Day, the next year, I called his cell phone because people were asking about him after a back surgery. and he had died.
Mm.
And so he partied hard. He had a back surgery, bad combination of medications. And I think there were some heart issues there, in fairness to him. And he passed away early. He was 48 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I was at the wake, his wake, and his wife came across the room and asked me to do part of his eulogy.
Oh my gosh.
And so I did do part of his eulogy, and it was just sad in that I had that kind of premonition. And so the next 18 months to 24 months were the hardest I've ever had in my career. Huge imposter syndrome. He was a bigger than life figure. You know, like when you got those people that like their energy like literally walks in before they do, and everyone's just like, hey, 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 you know, that type of person. Great leader, just had, you know, his vices, right? Work hard, play hard as a sales manager. And it was so hard because how do you replace someone that's not there? How do you replace someone that's bigger than life and now is gone? And we were you know, like a work family. I call this a dysfunctional work family. Are all families dysfunctional? I don't know. That's a whole other podcast. But anyway, so like they were grieving. They were in such a tough spot. And it caused me a lot of like mental, physical, emotional anxiety throughout the whole 18 to 24 months. But hey, I mean, I'm on the other side of it. Yeah. I learned a lot about myself. But yeah, it was super challenging.
That is so challenging. So now go back to that. So you were kind of, he was like your mentor and your boss?
Yes, at the same time.
Okay, so mentor and boss. And then he unfortunately passes away. And then you have to step in and lead the team through this terrible situation and beyond.
Yes. So I had 11 people in the team and everyone's looking at me. And then there was even a point where they didn't know what to do with our unit. And I went to the CEO of the organization. I was, and he's a big personality and I don't know what, you know, motivated me to go, but I just said, don't get rid of the unit, you know, let me kind of float us. And I floated us from a management perspective for like 18 to 24 months.
That's not floating. That's leading. That is leading for 18 to 24 months.
Yes.
Holy smokes. That's a long time. And so tell me about, so you had to kind of fight for the team at that point. So you're fighting for the team to remain intact. You're leading the team through this huge change. Now you said, you know, kind of his larger than life personality. And I'm guessing you don't really think about replacing him. It's more, how do I step in and get the team through this hard time situation where you had mentioned the imposter syndrome. And so how did you kind of work through that with your team and build that confidence? And I imagine it took some time.
Well, actually, I wasn't as healthy. You're giving me more credit. So I think that I was shadow boxing with his personality. I was shadow boxing with his ghost and being like, what would RJ do? What would RJ do? How would he have done it? Like, how would he have handled it? Right. And, you know, it's so hard because his wife gave me all of the contents of his file cabinet and all of his notes and all of his files and all of his sales books and all that stuff. So it was like this constant reminder.
Yeah.
And until recently, and it's been, I don't even know, let me think, like 16 years, I just got rid of it all because I was like, you know what, I'm a new leader. I'm my own leader now, right? Yeah. I don't need all this stuff. I don't need to hold this anymore. But I did shadow box with him for a long time and then had some physical stuff pop up. I fainted. I think that's in my chapter. I fainted in my kitchen. My little puppy at the time, he's still alive. He's 17. My puppy is, he's still alive.
So cute.
And so he woke me up, just like a lot of, you know, stress that, yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable. Yeah. And so I think it took me actually leaving the organization to realize that I could.
Oh,
and I think what was the precipice of it was, or that push, that propel was them not giving me the big job, not giving me his job and me realizing, oh my word, like they don't think I can, which was the culmination of imposter syndrome. And then anger came in and I was oh, heck no.
Right.
And that's what propelled my confidence forward. So it was a real human response of anger and them not realizing it. And then I say in the book, like them realizing after, like, we always knew you had it in you. And I'm like, what? Like, where were you like during this whole
Right,
process?
exactly.
Again, like sometimes we miss on employees, like where maybe we don't see it in them or we make a judgment that's maybe not the right judgment. And I think that's what happened here. So no ill will to them, still
Of
friends
course.
and colleagues out there, but they missed. They missed.
Yeah, they definitely did. And especially when you led the team, I'm not even going to use the word floated, you led the team for that long and then to not get the full-time job. I think you had said in the book, I was laughing, some dude named Eric, and you actually interviewed some dude named Eric.
I did.
And he became the leader. And so, yeah, that's really, 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 that's the anger that comes in there for sure. And then you decided to move forward after that. So,
yeah, I started to like put my hat in the ring in other places and other spaces. And yeah, it was very hard when I kind of had that intuition again when I was interviewing him. And I came home, told my husband, and I was like, I just think I interviewed the replacement. And he's like, what? And he was thinking, oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then it never came.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's so hard. I can't even imagine the whole situation. Again, from an HR perspective, that's a lot to work through. So I give you so much credit for making it through, for stepping in and being willing to lead the team, to say words at the funeral. I mean, gosh, Jen, that is just, you can't learn that in a book, that's for sure. So another thing that stood out to me too, like during this whole situation was like this proving yourself. So you talked about like taking the toll of proving yourself, like working nonstop to feeling like you had to prove yourself and that builds your confidence. So talk to us about that, because I think a lot of folks listening have been in that situation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a pattern I have. So, and we talked before we hit record, right? Like about authenticity. So being authentic, it's like a negative growth edge pattern I have, right? Where, if I'm in this like new level of imposter syndrome, I'm like, oh, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to like work myself to death, right? And I realized just more recently, but I had it in that situation where, okay, he passes away. They're like, okay, you can, like float us or lead us or whatever. And then I felt such imposter syndrome that I just doubled down and like did his job and my job and all the jobs, right? Well, I've realized that it's a fool's journey, right?
Yes.
Because we can only use so much energy.
Right.
And on top of that, I'm not him. He's not me. I bring skills. I didn't even recognize that I had different skills and talents and all that kind of stuff. And so now I am much more careful when I'm entering that pattern to be like, whoa, what needs to stay? What needs to go? Like, where's the energy management? But it's going to be one of my lifelong learnings. I'm better than I was for sure. But for some reason, again, another podcast, another day, I get thrown into these. It's kind of like my life's journey a little bit. I get thrown into these like weird situations where I have to come in and clean it up and then go in and clean it up and clean it up. And I think when you get higher and higher in leadership, it's almost like they're testing you to be like, all right, how are you going to do with this situation?
Yes.
How are you going to do with this one? So I would say for anyone going through this, like just be careful, be compassionate with yourself. Like I know that self-care is overused cliche, but you got to hold the no, right? Because you could really burn out.
Right. And everyone's different. And I love how you talk about energy. I talk about that a lot, and how work, finding roles and situations that are going to cultivate your energy versus drain your energy. It's never going to be perfect, but let's try to have that alignment, but when you're thrown into situations like this, you might not have that choice, quite frankly. And so then you probably learn the hard way, the kind of stuff that cultivates and drains your energy. And I think that feeling of proving yourself, I can totally relate to that so many times. I feel like every time I changed a job, I felt like I had to prove myself. And that meant working extra, coming up with, all the ideas, and just you almost drive yourself crazy trying to prove yourself in these situations when you really don't need to.
You don't need to.
Yeah. You were hired for a reason. You were given this opportunity for a reason, and take your time, to build and work the way that you do. So yeah, those clean it up situations are tricky too, or the turnarounds. I've been in those turnaround situations where it's like the team's failing, come in, like fix it, kind of thing. And it's like the spotlight, like spotlight on you. What are you going to do? So.
Yeah, but I've learned now that, whether I succeed or fail, it doesn't matter because I'm worthy. And I teach my clients this, like you are inherently worthy. You don't have to get, what is it? Like I call them gold star chasers, or I was like an A, like A A plus. I had to get an A. I had to get an A.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what? Like sometimes B work, sometimes even C work, friends, is fine.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's so funny. I was just talking to my community today. We were talking over the weekend. I was talking with my friend who's a big Yankees fan. And we were talking about it doesn't always have to be a home run. A single and a double are just as good. And they're going to move everybody along in the same way. So yeah, that's so good. And I agree with you. I actually love like the B plus effort. Like, hey, you don't have to give 125% all the time. B plus effort is great. I would have been thrilled to get a B plus in high school. I was not the straight A student, but I get it. I totally get it. So, okay. So I want to go back when you were talking about you didn't get like the big job. And so then you made the decision to resign. Obviously, this was a really challenging situation, especially when you're so invested in the team. And I know a lot of folks listening have a really hard time leaving a job and resigning and making that decision. And sometimes the anticipation leading up to it is a lot harder than when you have the conversation. But can you just share that experience and kind of how you moved through the emotional challenge of stepping away from a team like that?
Oh, this is you're like hitting me hard, like with like the questions where I'm like, oh, I'm still working on this.
Oh,
so I still work on this. So I am not, that was one of the things that I didn't want. I was telling my husband actually, who's, is more objective. I'm more subjective. I'm more emotional in this particular situation, right? With RJ.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I'm not going to go. And he's like, come on, because I ended up getting an offer that was huge lift, right? It was my first VP opportunity when I was comparing like staying versus going. And I mean, I was a skip level too. So I was like more of like a manager, senior manager, and I was moving to a VP. Like that's a no-brainer move. But I was like, oh, I need to stay with the team, right? Because they're my work family, my dysfunctional people, right? And so he snapped me out of it. So I think it's like leaning on like either your board of advisors or your spouse, friends, family, like people you can trust that can help you if you're, so emotionally ingrained or enmeshed, probably unhealthily so, right, with these people. And so when I put my notice in, I'm not going to lie, I was emotional. And for a long time, I used to feel bad about that. But now I just know that I put so much of myself into my jobs and into my teams that I know I'm inherently going to cry.
Of course.
And so I've realized that's okay. It's actually not a weakness. It's a strength to like be emotional and vulnerable. And then it took a long time. I mean, I went through a grieving process when I went over to the other job. And it was just like I kind of felt lost for a little bit. And I was trying to kind of block it out. And I don't think you should do that either. I do think that giving yourself a gap between jobs, and I did do that, is smart so that you can go through the grieving process a little bit between and try to bring as much fresh and new energy to the new role. I've done the opposite where you go from job to job and then that's not good because you're bringing that residual grief into the new position. And so that's what I would say is like, allow yourself to feel sad, especially if you've been there for a while or if you have really key relationships. I think you need to come to a sense of compassion and understanding that those relationships will change. You can say, oh yeah, we're going to be in touch. We're going to talk. We're going to do, all this stuff. But what happens over time is like, it just keeps distancing and it's okay because those work relationships will shift. And then I think giving yourself that break in between roles so that you can really reset your energy and be ready for the next job. Those would be the things that I would talk about. But yeah, I mean, it is hard. It is a grieving process to either lose a dear team member or to leave a team. And then finally, the team was mad at me for a while and I had to learn to accept that. And then eventually they were like not calling me a traitor when we would see each other. There was a little bit of that where they were a little angry with me that I abandoned them, that kind of stuff. And I had to forgive myself. And then eventually like they got over it with time too.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot. And you said 11 people on the team?
11. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big organization like for you. And then do you mind sharing how long you were at the organization? Like what was your tenure?
Yeah, you would think it was like 15 years, right? I was there for less than 5 years.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good amount of time, especially when it's the work hard, play hard, and you're like basically living with these folks. And I totally get it. And I think the relationship, that's holds so many people back from making a change. Like, oh, I love my team, I love the people I work with, and it's just so hard because of that. And you called it out. It's that emotional barrier and getting help from somebody that has an objective opinion on this or objective perspective because it's so easy to stay in touch with folks, like, yeah, over time that's probably going to diminish, but there's the option. So like social media, emails, like Zooms, it's so easy text message to stay in touch that I knew I could if I wanted to. And so that just because we're not going to be working together every single day, that in my mind at least made it a little bit easier to kind of detach. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think the reason I'm mentioning that is I left in 2009. So it's a whole different technical space, right?
Yes.
So like, it was like, okay, iPhone's like 4 years old, right?
Yeah.
Like, that kind of stuff. Or maybe 5, I don't know, but it wasn't as advanced as it is today. So I think today, so everyone like take heed, right? Like, and this is really exciting that, yeah, like you have so many, like, I'll catch you on this, I'll catch you on Voxer, I'll catch you on this, I'll catch you on Marco Polo. I mean, there's so many like ways to talk to people now that, yes, you can, if you want to make that effort, you can do it. And I had, it was a different generation of folks too, right? Like where they were more boomers and stuff like that. So they weren't going to be as readily wanting to go beyond a text message. But yeah, I mean, it was a choice that, the relationship's distance. But yes, you can stay in touch with people if you do leave the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I only mentioned that because I know it's and you had mentioned it. It's very hard to leave a team that you're so, indebted to, really.
I know.
It's interesting. And the other thing I wanted to mention that jumped out at me when you were sharing the story, when I was reading about it and we were talking about it here, is a lot of times I see folks that are just running away from something. Like something is terrible and they're running away from it. But you also had something to run towards. So you were, moving away from something that wasn't a fit anymore, but you were also moving towards something that was new and exciting and a big jump for you. And so having that balance, I also think is, and maybe at first it's like, okay, I'm ready to make the decision to leave. So I'm running away from this situation. But then having that to look forward to in terms of your next best role and having it be a promotion and all of those things is pretty cool. And I'm going to pull out a quote from your book that stood out to me. And you can tell me if this relates to what I just said. It said that it was a death to the team, but it was a new birth to you.
Yes.
And that really stood out to me because that's really what change is, so it's letting go of one thing and then moving into or refreshing or rebirthing or something else. So
it's so interesting you mention that because I'm not going to mention his name, but I just lost a really dear team member on the other side now.
Oh my gosh,
he was there for like 9.5 years and we all cried. And he's doing what's right for his family. And I am happy for him, right? And I'm, I would joke, I'm like, oh, you suck, right? Because we could talk to each other like that. Another salesperson. But I was like, and I'm happy for you. And I'm really happy for you.
Right.
And it's interesting being on the opposite side, right? Like, and it's not as dire of a situation as in the book, but it's being happy for him, but also helping the team move through grief.
Yes.
In a different way.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's interesting we're talking about it because I'm moving through it again.
Oh, see that? Right. And you should be happy for folks that have made a decision to, for whatever reason, you don't take it personal, right? You celebrate them and all of the things. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And I just have to put a plug in for taking the time between jobs. Highly, highly recommend. If you can and have the means, do it. It is such a good way to catch your breath and start fresh and be excited for something new. So I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to do that and that you shared that here. So thank you.
No problem.
Now, I'm an advocate for small, meaningful actions when it comes to making change. And I know you are too. So there's some really good tips that you shared in your chapter. And taking small, meaningful action is one of them. So can you share a little bit about how that approach helped you build confidence and navigate this transition?
Mm-hmm. So I think it was, and I'll have to recall here, is that, the first step was I got angry enough, right? Because anger can be a propelling, like we talked about, emotion. Mm-hmm. And so I just tapped into my body and said, okay, yeah, I need to make a change. Mm-hmm. And then from there, what I did, because I wanted that next level, I did some networking. So I just, started my tentacles, right? And like, because my bandwidth was stretched so thin, that's all I really could do for a while, and I was like, okay, but that's enough, right? It's, it's an idea of like one rep, right? Like one curl of the weight or one like, step towards, running a mile or whatever. And so I did do that. And then I scheduled, coffee chats and then, informational interviews with people. And then, someone reached out and, it was just like, for a while was putting one foot in front of the other as I was like on this journey. And then when I got the job offer, that was another level of hard, right? Because it was like, oh my word, I have to tell the team. So then telling the team and then, or telling management, then telling the team. So those were monstrous steps. And then, physically leaving, which was, gut wrenching for me because it was like, I'm leaving the family.
Mm-hmm.
And then, starting the new job. So it was like all those little steps like adding up. But I will say that I did throughout the process of leading the team in that 18 to 24 months, I had to run meetings, like sales meetings for them and do rah conversations with them and had to, at first I was leaning on RJ and being like, what was in his file cabinet? But then eventually I had to. So there were little steps in there too, where I had to write my own motivational speeches and my own like little snippets of you can do this. And then have really difficult conversations with people like, you're not doing well. Like it's sales, right? Like if you don't hit commission quota, like we're struggling. So I did find my path over time and it took a while. It took a while, but I would say anyone that's struggling with confidence, I teach this almost every day to people is the idea of like catching yourself in the imposter. And, the first step is just noticing. So just catching yourself in the imposter. And then if you can catch yourself, celebrate that. And then if you can do any reframing so that you're not wasting all this precious energy, like beating yourself up. I know it's easier said than done, but I think that in itself is a good step. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, for sure. And the point that stood out to me too was around like the bandwidth. And, I can totally relate to this where your plate is overly full. And it's like, how am I ever going to take the steps towards something new when I can't even do my, do the day to day with everything that I have on my plate? And so that's where I think those tiny actions all start to add up. And I call it 5 minutes to flourish. And that's really how I made every change in my career is like before I started my day, I just did 5 minutes of one tiny thing for my future self. And so that's what I love. And you said it, all of those little steps are going to add up. And before you know it, you're well on your way. And so if you have a full plate and you're at your wit's end, but you need to make a change, just those 5 minutes consistently will make it happen. You said the arm rep, like one arm rep at a time, literally. Yes. That's literally what it is. So.
And it sounds like, I will just say, like, you might be like, oh, people listening might be like, oh, yeah, okay, but I'm never going to get there. I don't know. If you take one step, do one rep, then the next day do another rep, if you look at that one muscle on that one side, after a couple of weeks, that muscle is going to be bigger than the other side because you've strained and strengthened that muscle. It's the same thing with confidence and it's the same thing with reaching your professional goals.
Yes, 100% agree with you. I'm so on board with that. And I feel like in today's world of work, how else can you do it? Like no one, you don't really have the luxury of days on end, trying to make a change, figure out what's next, get the clarity, do the soul search. You just don't have the time to do that in our world today. So a little bit each day makes a huge difference. And the other thing I just wanted to call out too is related to confidence specifically is noticing when you're feeling that self-doubt or you're feeling that imposter and then reframing it. That's such a smart way because if you don't even notice it, it's always going to be there. So pausing to notice it and then that quick reframe and a little celebratory moment for noticing it and reframing it is huge. So I'm thrilled that you mentioned that, and that's a really good tip for everybody. So anyone that's dealing or struggling with self-doubt, that is a great tip to jot down and start practicing to notice. So excellent. The other thing I just want to mention real quick here, I think around the end of the chapter, it talks about like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's uncomfortable. Like change is always going to be uncomfortable, but you had mentioned how much better you are for making these changes in terms of moving forward in your career and not settling. So I don't know if you have a couple points on that to share with folks.
Yep. So a couple things. The first thing is I'm really glad that I didn't stay there, right? Yeah. I'm really glad that I didn't stay in that job. I probably eventually would have I don't know, maybe not. I mean, but I'm sure eventually they would have promoted me to some higher level management and saw wow. But why? Why did I have to rot away there in a place that didn't really believe in me or pour into me or whatever, right? So it was really hard to leave. And I would say, okay, I was propelling forward, but I was taking steps back in terms of stepping away from the family, the work family and things like that. And, it's not the only time it's happened, right? So I call myself, because I am still in corporate, I'm an intrapreneur. So I'm my current company's resident intrapreneur, which is someone that does a lot of the innovation and really the selling and the pushing in the organization to be better. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten my butt kicked on the field that way.
Oh,
and so I'm like, forward and back and forward and yes and no and no and no and yes, and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't know. I think that all of these lessons really enable me to do the work through Brave Women at Work that I do, because that stuff you can't find in a book. And so I would just say, if you want to grow, you're going to have to get messy, right? You can't come home with a pristine uniform. You got to come home with like grass stains and like scaring your mom, right?
This is true.
So I would say get a little messy and just be prepared, right? Like that there are going to be some rough days, like where some days you're going to run off the field and you're going to be like, yes, like we did it, steps forward. And then there's going to be other days where you're like, wow, we got our butts kicked and it's okay.
Yeah. It's such a real view of career. And I think a lot of times we have these like visions of like, all the rainbows and lollipops, and that's just not what it is. And that's not how you grow. And that's not how you build confidence, anything like that. So I really appreciate that authentic view of what it feels like. And your community around Brave Women at Work, some of those stories are wild. And it's really interesting. I would encourage all listeners to get the books. There's a 3-series, Lessons in Leadership, Stories of Resilience, and Lessons in Confidence. And want some authenticity and some realness about careers, go read some of those stories, because beyond Jen's story here, there are others that have been through the ringer. So I'm so grateful for you, Jen, for sharing that story, and for all the folks in your community that are willing to share their stories. So
thank you.
With that, one of my favorite things to ask guests is for a flourishing favorite. So love recommendations around a book or a podcast or some other resource that has made a significant impact on your career.
Okay, so I have to share it because my friend told me it's the 48th anniversary of this movie. So one of my favorite movies is Rocky.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to just say to you all, I know it's old, right? I'm dating myself.
You're fine.
Go watch the first
one.
It's
so good. Yeah.
Go watch the first one. You want to talk about like the whole idea of like, moving forward, moving back, and like understanding triumph and grit and perseverance. Like that's a great movie.
Definitely.
And so there's your movie. And then another one that I really like that's just coming up is The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Oh, yes. Great call out.
That's a really good one.
Nice. Excellent. I'm going to check that one out. Thank you. And we have a running list of these. So I'm going to add this to the running list for folks. So I feel like there's so much stuff out there. Anytime we can condense and give recommendations, it's helpful. Yes. So I really appreciate you sharing those. So Jen, tell us, before we hit record here, you were sharing some information about a couple of conferences that you have coming up. So I would love for you to share where people can find you and maybe a little bit more about these conferences.
Yes, thank you so much. So you can find me at bravewomenatwork.com. So again, that's bravewomenatwork.com. And then there you're going to find the podcast. It's out there, and you can find the podcast with the same name wherever your podcasts are and where you listen. But there's a blog out there. You can learn more about the work I do with women there. And then in terms of the events, we are going to be doing 2. So when I say we, it's Hope Mueller and I as my business partner of Hunter Street Press and Climb, CLIMB conferences. So the first one's in February, late February 27th, I believe, to March 1st. And it is going to be breaking barriers. And it's going to be a women's retreat in Lake Las Vegas. And that can be found right on the Climb Conferences website, which, Jen, I'll give you that so we can include it in the show notes. And then in June, so I have to be really careful what I tell people. I have to tell you this. So Hope, let's do a conference. And then all of a sudden stuff starts flying. So I got to be careful what I tell Hope because it gets real fast.
She's amazing.
She is amazing. And so we are going to be hosting, it's called Thrive in 25, and it's a women's leadership conference. And that's going to be more of a bigger scale. So the retreat is more small scale, very intimate setting. And then if you want to be with a larger crowd and do a lot of networking, it also is going to be different than other conferences because, and I didn't share this, I'm forming something called the Brave Circle. And it's going to be an accountability group after so that, when you go to a conference, you don't just go, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then you don't do anything with it. It's going to have an accountability group that's partnered with it. But that can be found at thrive-in25, the numbers 25.com.
Excellent. And yes, we will add all of that to the show notes. And anyone that's listening, I can attest, Jen and Hope are amazing humans. You're going to love their energy. And I can't even imagine what these conferences would be like. So definitely check them out. So Jen, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all this very authentic wisdom. I know our listeners are going to appreciate it so much. And it's just been such a joy.
Thank you so much for having me.
As always, listeners, the notes from today's episode will be on the blog at flourish.careers/blog. I'll talk to you next time.